Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. This is episode 116, and my guest this week is Jeanna Coursey. Jeanna was with me a few weeks ago, but when she heard last week's episode on trauma and some of the basics of the neuroscience of sexual trauma, there was a visceral reaction that made her want to reach out and do a back and forth conversation with me about some of the details of that episode and how the information impacted her in light of her own experience. This is that discussion. I think you'll find it intriguing, insightful, and hopefully impactful to your own healing. I want to give you a heads up that the recording quality for this episode isn't really great. Jeanna had to do this interview from her car while she was on her lunch break, so please overlook the background noise. I think the content of this conversation will make it worth it. Here's Jeanna. Hi, everyone. We're back this week with Jeanna Coursey. She's rejoined me. It's not been too long since she was here before, but she heard this past week's show and decided that she wanted to give some input on that, and I welcome that. I'm so happy that she requested to be here. So, Jeanna, welcome.
Thank you.
It's really good having you back. Jeanna, let's just dive right into it. What is it about this week's show that made you want to reach out to me?
Ever since we had our last episode, I've been thinking a lot about how there's just so much more to it past the events themselves, and just how we as survivors live with this invisible disability, and how it's just hard to navigate in the world where you're living with that internally and then not able to communicate that to other people. You don't wear a sign that says, "I'm a survivor, treat me with care." It's not like you're missing a leg or you're in a wheelchair, but it's just as crippling and debilitating, and you're expected to be something that you aren't able to be all the time. And when I heard this most recent episode, it's just funny that you decided to record an episode like that, because it's exactly what I was thinking about and along the lines that I wanted to revisit with you already. And I really appreciate, just talking about the neuroscience of it, because it gives me grace, I guess, for myself, in that I'm not always going to be like everybody else, and that's okay, that I can be kind to myself. It doesn't make it any easier to navigate in the world. Like just yesterday, I was sitting in my car after a particularly insensitive interaction in a medical setting, and it disrupted my sense of stability so much that I sat there and just watched people walking in and out of the building and thinking, they're perfectly fine with mediocrity. They're perfectly fine with living with this level of ineptitude and this level of unkindness. And maybe I just don't belong. Maybe I'm the one. Maybe I'm the one that is like, there's something wrong with me. I mean, I got over it, right? Like, I got over it. But it sent me into this tailspin of, well, it's just so hard. It's just so hard to interact with people. And why does it affect me so poorly all the time? So
I think you've really hit the nail on the head, because so many of my listeners and guests have come right out and said the same things that you're saying, that it's amazing how truly insensitive most people are to the mental health issues of people they interact with on a day in, day out basis. It doesn't take much kindness and just openness to help someone feel at ease and comfortable. But when you're talking about somebody like us who have emotional scars that we carry around with us, and for some those scars are very, very fresh and new, it's really difficult for us to adapt and comprehend and show any type of resilience on an immediate basis when we're feeling not only offended, but sometimes attacked for the things that are going on inside of us. And you're right, it's such a difficult issue because it's something you don't see. Trauma scars are inside of us, and you don't know who's been traumatized in a sex assault or rape situation and are still carrying those scars that are fresh and sometimes not very well healed.
And it's funny, too, because if you think about it, it's a very high percentage of the population that we're talking about here.
Right.
You know, so like most people that you interact with on a daily basis, helping professionals that you interact with are going to be scarred in that way.
Yeah.
and they're going to need that sensitivity.
Right. It's a
So,
very high prevalence rate. Absolutely. And so that just then begs the question, how are we to deal with this? I think from my perspective, it's a matter of education. And it's my mission and my goal through not only this podcast, but through my professional life in looking for platforms to speak to audiences about this very thing. It's talked about a lot more than it used to be. My new mantra is normalizing the conversation. And I have to admit that there are some amazing strides being made, but certainly not fast enough and certainly not on a large enough scale to make an impact on our culture.
Yeah, definitely education is important. I feel like, at least physically, in my physical medical care realm, it is known, I think, more now, but then it's discounted. Some of the things that you experience that you go into the doctor for, the chronic pain, the fatigue, the gastrointestinal issues. You undergo all of these tests, but never is anything found. And once they find out that you've had trauma in your history, that's just discounted as, oh, it's just trauma. It's just trauma. And it almost feels like there's nothing we can do for you because it's just trauma.
Right.
That sometimes feels like, the education is great, but what then? And it almost goes in the opposite direction of not being able to receive care for it.
Absolutely. I see
I don't know if
that.
that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. In fact, you're not the first person who's brought up the issues in the medical field, a field where you would expect there to be a higher level of care and a higher level of knowledge about what trauma does to the somatic system and why we suffer those gastrointestinal issues and headaches and insomnia and all of the things that you're talking about. Shouldn't the medical field be up on that? Shouldn't they be hyper aware of everything that we're talking about and then respond in a appropriate manner instead of a way that causes people more stress and more harm and actually exacerbates an already bad situation?
I wonder what is the appropriate response, though, in their field. I've thought about that. If they can't fix it with a pill, if they can't fix it with a physical therapy or with the prescription, then how do they approach this? How do they help? There's not a lot that they can do other than care, be kind.
Well, that goes a long way, for one thing. And the research shows that being kind and understanding and knowing about the conditions that we're talking about helps people internally to resolve some of this. Knowledge on the part of caregivers that they aren't exacerbating an already bad situation. What are your thoughts about that? Do you see some sort of treatment adjustments that could be made?
I think for one, just having covered access to care would be great. Like with me, I'm slowly building financial wealth. I'm 10 years post-abuse and only now getting off of public assistance. So I had Markel for 10 years and my children too. And nothing, they have coverage, but most providers don't accept that insurance. It's just hell for the provider to have to bill Markel for reimbursement for their services. There's only only CBT is covered. I didn't have coverage for EMDR. I don't have chiropractic coverage. I didn't have any kind of alternative medicine coverage, and certainly not any of those things that you talked about, like psychedelic treatments and stuff like that. Like, certainly not those things. So for people who are dealing with the financial despair that comes as a result of abuse, especially chronic abuse, they're priced out, right? There's
it's true.
No way for them to access those things, even if it were readily available in their community, which some places it is and some places it isn't. There's not a lot where I am. And even then, when, I found a way or a loophole or some little part of the coverage document that says that I can get this thing, finding someone who has openings in that area to be able to take on new patients is another thing. And then I think the other hurdle or the other boundary or barrier is that I don't always have the wherewithal to fight for myself and to push and to search and to call and to be rejected. I mean, I definitely have a rejection avoidance, right? So when you're already dealing or are in crisis or dealing with so many things, and then also in a caretaker role and dealing with so many things for other people, your children, it feels all consuming. It feels drowning. Some days I am a rock star, and I'll make lists, and I'll check off the list, call after call, leave a message, send an email, follow up, just constantly on. And then I'll fall into bed and I'll just be completely wiped out, and for 3 days won't be able to function.
Yeah. That is such the reality of the situation. You have one good day. It's like there's a consequence to having a good day. And that is, like you said, 3-4 bad days afterwards. The recovery, the motivation, the will to do more, all of that is just wiped out. You've spent it all in one day.
Yeah. And I think that when you're talking to service providers like doctors who are, even if they're kind and caring, they're going to say, oh, I'm going to give you this referral and this referral and this referral. And when I hear that now, I know what that means for me. I know what kind of future that sets up for me. It's cool. It's nice. It's fun to know that, oh, there might, there's a little glimmer of hope in that. But at the same time, I'm mentally preparing for that turmoil that I just described, because it's all now on my shoulders. And I think that is one thing that is not taken into consideration when providers are dishing out the referrals. It's almost like, I've said this many times, like, I am an advocate, and I can tell you I have so much energy for advocating for other people. But when I'm in those situations where I'm having to do this work for myself, make these phone calls for myself, explain the situation all over again to yet another person, it is, I don't know, sometimes it just feels so impossible. And I think that that's what they don't understand. It's not that easy to just get a referral and just go see this person or this new provider, It's a lot for someone to bear. And I've said, I need an advocate. Where's my advocate? Where's my case manager? Right. That's just going to take all of this stuff on for me and make the connections for me and tell the story for me so I don't have to say it again. And I think that a lot of times has been like the biggest roadblock for me. If I look at myself, I think I'm a pretty strong person. I think I've made leaps and bounds. If I look back, I see a lot of progress in my journey, yet I'm still subject to all this stuff. And I think about other people who haven't made it to the place where I am, how hard it is for them. And it is invisible. They don't talk about that. You don't talk about that. You just live with it.
But it also is a huge commentary on our society and our system as a whole. It happens to be in the news right now. Mm-hmm. The whole issue of healthcare. I just know that what you're talking about is a reality. Many struggle and stay stuck for years, decades. Yeah, and it goes to some of the things that you sent to me in these notes of things that we could talk about, which exacerbates PTSD, exacerbates the depression. If you were borderline depressed at the beginning of searching for some sort of mental health and physical answers, you're going to be more depressed as you fight on looking for those, which causes anxiety, which causes more depression, which causes more PTSD. It's a vicious circle.
Yeah, it is. And it creates such a despair. I think that's maybe a good word for it. There's just such a despair. You just feel so hopeless sometimes when you're in those situations. And I know you had talked about living with hypervigilance or living not able to come down. And I do live like that, I live like that constantly, but I didn't know a difference. I don't know what it's like to relax. I don't know what it's like. People say, oh, just relax your shoulders, put them down. I had a physical trainer at the gym, and she would tell me, okay, you have to put your shoulders down. And when you're doing this lift, put your shoulders down. And I'm like, they're down. And she would push them and they wouldn't go down. And I'm like, this is where my shoulders live.
This is where my shoulders are stuck.
Yes, right. And in those moments, you realize you're living with this level of tension And there is a different way to be, but there's not like a roadmap or how to get there. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to relax my shoulders. I've been living with this level of whatever it is, that this heightened level all the time, every moment for all my life. So when my therapist asks me, what do you do or how do you relax? How do you come down? I'm like, I don't know what that even means.
Yeah.
I maybe when I go to sleep, but even then I sometimes can't sleep, or I'm just so stressed out that I can't sleep. I drug myself. I take Benadryl just to be able to sleep. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So even in sleep, there isn't a level of relaxation or coming down off of that high, or whatever it is.
No, not at all. It's the normalcy of that hypervigilant state that most providers don't understand. And telling you to put your shoulders down isn't the solution, especially if they don't go down, It's not just at the gym. I mean, I've heard psychotherapists say the same thing. Well, just eat, breathe, do some tapping, relax your gut, do these exercises of relaxation, listen to this recording, put on this app.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it really is so surfacey that sometimes it doesn't even penetrate to the point of making an impact at all. And it's almost an exercise in frivolity. And what's the point? Where am I going after this? I'm going right back into a state of hypervigilance. Maybe I can relax for 30 minutes while I listen to this app. But as soon as it's over, or as soon as I wake up, my world reality is right back smack in my face. And now what? And you put that in your notes. No relaxing for me, ever. Ever. What would that feel like if somebody put you on a beach and catered to your every need, and your children were cared for, and you could just take care of you for the next 10 years, soaking up the sun and breathing clean air and having people bring food to you and sleeping without worry? It might take 10 years of that before you'd start to relax.
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't come in like a week.
No.
I would just be looking around for, okay, what do I got to do? What I got to do? And thinking about, the list for when I get back.
Yeah. And that hypervigilance lives with you forever.
Yep.
Like, what's waiting around the corner? What's coming after this next wave that I'm watching hit the shore? When's the tsunami coming?
Waiting for the other shoe to drop constantly. Yep.
And I think just talking about it and recognizing that this is the reality of survivorship is helpful. And I think other people need to hear it too. Only in the sense that, if for no other reason than to recognize, well, I'm not alone in this. Jeanna's feeling the same way. Jeanna, you're feeling this. Your willingness to call me and say, hey, let's talk about it, says volumes. And psychologically, it may have an impact down the road. It may help to know that other people heard us talking about this. And that gives a level of comfort, even though it's not huge, it's not vast, it's acknowledgement. And I think acknowledgement is part of recovery.
True. It's true. There was a huge weightlifting after recording the first one. There's always a weightlifting whenever I'm able to tell my story. Connecting with others, I think, too, is healing in itself.
It makes me grateful for you, Jeanna, for being on this show and for talking about this the way you are, because so many people want to and don't know how, or don't have the wherewithal within their mental health constitution to make a phone call or email me or say, hey, I've got something to say about this too. Can I be on your show? I'm thankful for people like you who do that and who come forward and are willing to speak with me and get your voice heard.
Yeah, thank you. I am also thankful for people that do that. I'm not quite sure how to reconcile conflict avoidance. I am a fighter, and I guess that's just what it is. When I feel like I am speaking up on behalf of someone who doesn't have a voice, I have a list.
Isn't it true, though, that even talking with me about this, you'll go back to work. I think you're on your lunch break. You'll go back to work. You'll fight through the rest of the day. But by tonight, just having this conversation, while it may be renewing on one level, is exhausting on another. Is that conflict, that dichotomy? You feel that, am I right? I know I do.
Yeah, I do. I do. Totally. I was feeling it even prior to this conversation, just thinking about all of the situations. Like as I was writing my list for notes for things I might want to cover, I was revisiting scenarios in my head of times when that happened. And even that is dangerous for my body. Like that is, it's almost like I'm back there again.
Right.
And I was already shaking even before I came out here to talk. So yes, like you said, it's a dichotomy. It's just really, I don't know, it's just the way I live.
It's devastating. And like you said from last time, maybe a few days down the road, it might be rejuvenating. Certainly not on a level of circumstantial repercussions that come from talking about this stuff, because it brings to the forefront of our brains the reality of our own situations. You wrote down money problems. You wrote down overreaction to any form of threat, especially with your children. You wrote down perfectionism. All of these things that I can 100% personally relate to in my own situation, not only from the recollection and issues of my sexual assault, which mostly happened when I was a child, but also as an adult, the times that it did happen and the repercussions that I felt from trying to deal with that on a day in, day out basis when your immediate supervisor is one of the people who's fondling you at work. It's hard to go to work. Right? It's hard to get in the car. It's hard to get out of bed.
Yeah.
So all of these things that lead to things like perfectionism and a desire to be better and to compensate for the harm that's being done to you. And that striving for perfectionism takes a toll. It's exhausting. It's emotionally draining.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like we just said a minute ago.
It's impossible.
It's a vicious circle. It really is. Jeanna, we've got so much more we need to talk about, and I know you've got to get back to work. I want to thank you for being here, and I also want to say let's do this again in the not too distant future. Let's do some more. Let's keep going with that list that you've made and talk about it more. And let's then take note of what today's discussion does to us physically and emotionally, so that next time we get together, we can talk about the repercussions of this show itself.
I think that's a good idea. I just think that this is going to be exercise in self-reflection, because I don't necessarily look within, or sit outside of myself and just observe what's happening.
Jeanna, thank you. I hope you have the energy and strength and willpower and resilience to get back to work and do the things that you need to do without too much disruption. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you. And I really enjoy you.
Well, I enjoy you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
I guess we'll talk later.
All right. Bye.
Yeah.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. My heartfelt gratitude goes out to Jeanna Coursey for reaching out to me to have a discussion about the impacts her trauma has had on her day-to-day life. I hope each of you listeners felt a connection with Jeanna's thoughts and that this discussion resonated with you. Thank you, Jeanna. This was a great discussion. I hope each of you had a learning experience, or at least some reflective moments that helped you understand some of the neuroscience of trauma. That's part of what this podcast is all about, learning and understanding more about the neuroscience and the impact trauma has on the brain. Your comments on how this episode impacted you would be greatly appreciated. Send me an email and tell me your thoughts. You'll find my email address in the episode notes. And while you're at it, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast and rate the show. Taking the time to do this greatly enhances the opportunity for others to benefit from hearing this podcast. Also, please do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault. One way to do this is to be sure and tune in next week when I bring you another guest who will tell about their experience of rape or sexual assault in order to help further themselves on their healing journey or to help you along the way with your healing. Another way is to start by believing if someone is reaching out to you to tell you about their interpersonal violence experience, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.